Good afternoon and welcome to NOCC's Facebook Live, Ask the Experts on Clinical Trials. We are delighted to be joined today by Dr. Shannon Westin, a member of NOCC's Medical and Scientific Advisory Board. Dr. Westin is an associate professor at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, where she is the Director of Early Drug Development and Phase 1 Trials in the Department of Gynecologic Oncology and Reproductive Medicine. I'm so used to saying gynonc that like having like the whole word is struggling.
I hear you.
Also the primary investigator or co-investigator for more than 30 novel treatment trials in gynecologic malignancies. And she serves on the National Cancer Institute's Gynecologic Cancer Steering Committee and is co-chair for their ovarian cancer task force. I can't think of anyone more suited than you, Dr. Westin, to talk to us today about ovarian cancer clinical trials.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks so much. It's so great to be with you.
We are thrilled to have you. I think we'll start today with just an overview of clinical trials and then move into some of the more promising ones that are happening in ovarian cancer today. For those who are watching, we will leave time at the end for questions, but please know that we will not answer any specific questions. We encourage you to have those conversations with your medical team.
Please.
But in the meantime, feel free to let us know where you are from in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. So let's get started. Dr. Westin, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what is a clinical trial and why they are important.
Sure. You know, the bottom line is a clinical trial is how we are going to change practice for patients. And specifically in this group, we're looking to change practice for women with ovarian cancer, right? So the trial could be looking at anything. Like my area of expertise is something called developmental therapeutics. So the clinical trials that we do are trying to bring novel agents, either alone or in combination with other agents, into the treatment of patients with ovarian cancer, whether that be upfront ovarian cancer or in the recurrent setting or as a maintenance strategy to try to keep the cancer away. So that's one major kind of clinical trial. But also we can see trials that are looking at mechanisms and ways to improve quality of life or to assess issues for patients, issues with survivorship, issues for adverse events after treatments. So there's a lot of different things that can really be assessed as part of a clinical trial. But I think most of us, when we think of it, we think of, oh yeah, I'm going to go on this trial. I'm going to get a new drug. I'm going to see if it works, and they're going to watch me really close, and we're going to hopefully answer a question. So that's the basics of what a clinical trial is.
And also why it's important, because it's going to advance the science.
Yeah, so well, and not only that, I'll say there's a lot of benefits to being a part of a clinical trial. One is, yes, you're advancing the science. That's how we change the standard of care. Many of you in the audience have received kind of the standard of care of paclitaxel and carboplatin, right? A lot of people know that. I mean, I feel like, yep, exactly. So, and all our trainees, like they don't know the answer. They're like paclitaxel and carboplatin, like, because that has been such a standard of care, not just for our patients with ovarian cancer, but our patients with other gynecologic cancers like endometrial and cervical. But that got there because of clinical trials. So pre the trials that looked at paclitaxel, people were getting completely different regimens. And so that really is how we push the envelope. And our goals, there's a number of goals that we're looking for clinical trials. One is obviously we want to cure cancer, right? So we want to improve outcomes. We want to see better response rates. We want to see something called progression-free survival improve, which is how long it is before cancer starts to grow again. And then, of course, the bottom line, we want overall survival to improve. We want people to live longer, right? And so those are the things that I think are really important that come out of a clinical trial. But from your standpoint, you might get access to one of these new drugs early. This may be a drug like PARP inhibitors. Imagine all the women that were on clinical trials with PARP inhibitors that got them early. Now everyone is scrambling, trying to get on them because they want to get that extra benefit. They want to get that progression-free survival. They want to feel better. And so, part of being on a clinical trial is you may get access to something early that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. Then I would say another benefit is, when you're on a clinical trial, I mean, we're always watching y'all like hawks, right? I mean, we are checking everything, checking labs, but when you're on a clinical trial, you are connected baby. You and I and my nurse and my study coordinator, we are all a team and we are talking constantly and communicating. So I definitely think it helps patients and survivors feel really kind of well supported and really like, oh, anything that happens to me, I know I got my team around me, and I'm not saying that you don't have that with your doctor. You absolutely do. But with that clinical trial, it's just an extra layer of care, extra layer of people that are all looking out for you and keeping an eye on you. So I think there's lots of different benefits that you might receive as part of the trial.
That was a good sell there. Maybe you can tell us who should be participating in a clinical trial. A lot of times people think that it is when you have no other resorts, but that isn't true, right?
Absolutely not. And really, there's opportunities to be involved with clinical trials kind of at the entire continuum of your cancer care. And that goes from, diagnosis or even pre-diagnosis for some of our previvors, right? There are trials that are looking at ways to screen women that are at higher risk of developing ovarian cancer. And so getting involved with a clinical trial like that is also a possibility. At diagnosis, at upfront treatment, like we talked about, maintenance strategies, and then of course at recurrence. And then we also see surgical trials. We see trials around quality of life after treatment. So if you're, in remission and you're in your survivorship period and you're just living your dream, there may be clinical trials that are available to you either to mitigate side effects or just to follow you to see what happens after these treatments. How do you feel? We have several of these at our institution where one of my partners, Dr. Larissa Meyer, does amazing work in health services, is really just interviewing ovarian cancer survivors at multiple time points just to see what are their symptoms, what are their side effects, what's long lasting, because we just don't know. If you finish and you're 5 years out, what can you expect? What are some of the things that you might experience? And that's the way we figure those things out. So the bottom line is these are not situations of last resort. And as I mentioned before, when we were talking about benefits, you may get access to something that you otherwise wouldn't get, and it could end up giving you benefit. I mean, there are no guarantees. That's why it's research. But, the reason we've designed the trials the way we have is because we think it's going to improve outcomes. And we have reason to believe, based on the science and what we know so far, that this is going to yield a better outcome for you. And so I think that's the type of stuff that as a patient, I would want to be involved in. And I'll just kind of give an aside, a lot of the studies that we do that are available to patients early on in their cancer diagnosis, so maybe at the time of their first diagnosis, at the time of their first treatment, you're going to get the standard of care, right? You're going to get your chemo or whatever but we might be adding something else, right? So we might be adding a novel agent, a targeted therapy, or an immunotherapy, again, trying to get better benefit for you. So I am a huge proponent of really being involved kind of across the entire cancer continuum to really get the best access that you can.
I think you had a good point there in that you aren't just going to be getting whatever's new, you're going to be getting that standard of care also. So it's not like you're worried, oh my gosh, what if I get a placebo? Well, if I get a placebo, right, I'm still getting the standard of care. I'm not getting no care. And I think that's a myth that people have.
Yeah, I would just mention, mentioning placebos is a great point. Like, we still do have placebo controlled trials, but they're pretty rare. Those are going to be randomized phase 3. So phase 3 trials are kind of the last big trial before something gets FDA approved. And so to be able to get that FDA approval, they need to show that what their drug is adding. So what is this other intervention adding? Is it adding that survival that we want? Is it adding that response? And the only way to do that is to have even arms. And so you'll get that chemo. And then on the other arm, you maybe get the chemo and an immune therapy, let's say. But to make sure that it's not a placebo effect or, that there's truly an impact, they do have a placebo in that other arm, but you're not getting just placebo. You're getting what you would get with me in my clinic off of a trial. It's just that we're going to add that extra. So that's a really important point. Yeah. Yes. And then later on trials, if you do a phase 2 or a phase 1, when, say if there's you're in a situation where you have recurrent disease, then it's it's much less likely to get a placebo in that case. You're definitely getting the agents, and the doctors and the nurses and the team will let you know, okay, these are the things you're going to be taking, and it's all the real stuff.
Right. And you may have some side effects that go along with it, so you know you're getting the real stuff.
Exactly, exactly.
How would someone raise a question with their doctor if they're not in Houston, let's say, or they're not at a large medical, near a large medical institution? How do you bring up the subject of clinical trials with your own doctor?
Yeah. I mean, just very as straightforward as you can, right? So what, and actually I think a lot of the survivor groups, including NOCC, have kind of questions to bring your doctor, things that you can, like a little sheet that you can print out, like, okay, what's my stage? What's this? What's the prognosis? Kind of helping you keep yourself straight and make sure you don't forget, kind of critical questions. But in many of those documents, I see it says, are there clinical trials that are, I'm eligible for? What would those look like? And that's what I would do. And if your doctor says, oh, I'm not aware of any, or no, we don't have any here, then I would, ask, do you have someone that you refer to? Do you have a group that you refer to that does clinical trials? Like, depending on the area, or the location of where you're being seen, there are cancer centers all over the country. And frankly, many of our community partners do tons of clinical trials, like the US Oncology Group and others. We have a community clinical trials groups that they enroll a ton. So, being not in an academic center, there's still potentially an opportunity for trials, but you just have to see what goes on at the institution where you're being seen, what your doctor might have to offer. And then if they don't, I would say, well, where do you send people for second opinions? Because I'd like to know if there's a clinical trial that I'm eligible for. Yes. And I really think the majority of physicians are open to that, and for example, like if somebody sends me, a patient with a new diagnosis and I have a trial for them, great. But if I don't, I'm going to, give you your advice and support what your doctor's doing and, send you back to your doctor. So, we have a really open working relationship, and then you're in the system. And in the future, if you need treatment, you can just reach out and say, hey, do you have something now? Like, because this is what's going on. And so it makes it kind of just a team-based care that I think is really nice. If your primary doc doesn't have trials kind of at their fingertips.
And one thing I just want to kind of go back to that you hinted upon was that some of these local community hospitals do offer trials. And I think the few benefits we have seen from COVID is that now there's more opportunities that you don't have to maybe necessarily go to that big center if it's not near you to get your blood work, to get, routine tests. You might be able to do some of that in your own backyard.
It's absolutely true. I think there's a lot of community centers that do a ton of work in this. And then if you did have to come to a center like MD Anderson, say you have a very, rare tumor type, or you're a few lines in and your doctor doesn't have a particular trial that fits for you, but we do, we try to do as much remote as possible now. And it's really nice, the FDA and NCI have been very open to that because they understand, traveling with COVID adds its own set of risks. And so if we're doing a visit where we just need labs and maybe a quick, chit chat and make sure you're feeling okay, that's something that potentially we can do now over Zoom, instead of you having to kind of fly in or drive or whatever to go to the larger center. So that, there's not a lot of great things about COVID, but, that flexibility, building that flexibility into some of these trials has been a really good benefit.
So who pays for these additional costs for a clinical trial?
Yeah, so, typically when we talk about when people are starting clinical trials, there's a bunch of hoops to jump through, right? So not literal, although kind of almost literal, where you have to kind of check all these boxes before you can start the trial. The first box that we check is we submit to your insurance company, we are considering a trial for such and such. And they have to say, yep, that's fine. We support you. Now, that doesn't mean they're paying for the whole trial, but they will be expected to pay for things that are so-called standard of care. So a visit with me that you would have no matter what you were on, or basic labs that, again, you would have no matter what you were on. Those things are going to be covered by your insurance company, and your insurance company is going to agree to that before we start. And I would say about 99% of the time they do. There's a real push in the United States to support clinical trials, especially for patients with cancer. And so there's an understanding that that is absolutely a priority, and that is the best care that we can give. So those things are covered by the insurance. Anything that's specific to the trial or part of the experimental piece of the trial, that's going to be paid for by one of any number of things. If it's an industry trial, it's going to be paid for by the drug company, and they're going to provide the drugs. They're going to support any additional tests, like if you need to get your heart checked, or if you need to get a special eye exam or anything like that, that's going to be covered by the company. If the trial is supported, say, by a grant, so by the government, then, the National Cancer Institute will have agreed to pay for the specific things that are being done. So the goal is for you as the volunteer in this trial not to have any costs, for you. Now, some clinical trials and some clinical studies will actually give you incentives like, gas cards, or, money to pay for a place to stay, or even travel costs. That's not as common. It's much more common to see that it's all the medical stuff that gets paid for, but not any additional kind of, incentive or bonuses, but some will. And so when you're signing up, you can say, oh, are there travel costs covered, or, and they'll definitely make sure exactly what you'll be, what kind of benefits there are, and if there's compensation.
Okay, I want to get to the really, really good stuff now. And that is, tell us what is, new and exciting happening in the world of trials in ovarian cancer.
Sure. I think there's some kind of major areas that I think are worth mentioning and worth discussing. The first is kind of what we were already getting at, is really how we're trying to change the way we treat patients with upfront diagnoses. So when you first are diagnosed, and like I said, standard of care has been paclitaxel and carboplatin for quite some time.
Yes.
So now, and for a while we were just doing different ways to give it. So there was people giving it weekly versus every 3 weeks versus intraperitoneally. And there were a number of things around that. Yes, exactly. But now we're trying to see what we can add to it. And specifically, what kind of maintenance we can give after it that may help patients. And I think many of you are aware of the PARP inhibitor craze and how awesome those have been. But really, those have been primarily the best for those patients that either have a germline or a hereditary BRCA mutation, or a BRCA mutation in their tumor. Now, there's another group of women that'll have an abnormality in their tumor called HRD, or homologous recombination deficiency. And they also seem to benefit a lot from PARP, but that's only about 50% of all women. And so there's a huge opportunity here to continue to make a big difference. And so a lot of the ongoing or finished and we're waiting on clinical trials in the upfront setting are saying, okay, can we add immunotherapy? Can we add an anti-angiogenic therapy like bevacizumab, which many of you may have received? And then can we add a PARP too? And can we do these with chemo and then follow them with maintenance? And will people live longer? And so I think that's a really exciting place to be right now. And I think over the next few years, we'll be seeing results of those trials, and fingers crossed that it makes a difference, especially for those women who don't have BRCA or who don't have homologous recombination deficiency. I think that's an area where we still have a big opportunity to improve. And of course, we always want to improve everybody. So we want to cure more patients with BRCA too. We want to cure more patients with HRD. But I think that group that has homologous recombination proficiency is a real opportunity. So I think that's one area that I know we're all really excited about. My, real kind of what I've really focused on for my career is for those patients that did get benefit from PARP, or from those patients who never really got the benefit we expected from PARP, can we overcome PARP resistance? And so there's a lot of really cool trials ongoing trying to take PARP and add to it with different mechanisms of known mechanisms of resistance. So basically canceling out the way the tumor can start to grow again. So we've got a number of really cool strategies that are being presented and currently getting enrolled right now, where we're trying to overcome that resistance, and not just resistance in people that have BRCA or HRD, but again, in women that have those homologous recombination proficient tumors, trying to sensitize those tumors to PARP. So I think that's an area where there's tons of trials ongoing, and we're seeing some amazing results with women staying on these trials for over a year. And that's of course really unusual once this cancer has come back multiple times.
Right.
And then the final thing I'll mention is I think we're all really want to see more precision medicine. Obviously, the BRCA story with PARP inhibitors, that's a very clear target and drug, and we love that. We need more of that. And there's a whole group of agents that are called antibody drug conjugates, which essentially take a really strong chemotherapy, too strong. We couldn't give it to you IV, you would get super sick, okay? And they link that really strong chemo, and they call that chemo the payload, right? And they link it to a little marker. And that marker is something that cancer cells typically express. And so some of the markers we've seen are folate receptor alpha is a big one right now, or there's one called NaPi2b. So the point of this is the little ovarian cancers are expressing that protein. The antibody drug conjugate comes and binds to that protein and then gets taken into the cell, and kaboom, payload, big bad chemotherapy explodes inside that cancer cell and kills that cell. So it's a really cool way to truly do targeted therapy. So we're really working on developing those interesting antibody drug conjugates with markers that make sense for our patients with ovarian cancer. And some of the early results have been extremely promising. So I'm very excited to see those trials complete and hopefully get those drugs to our patients.
Well, gosh, everything you've said is definitely going to give our audience some hope. So this is super exciting. We are getting close to time, and I would love to.
Oh my gosh, goes so fast.
I know, it always does. I would love to see if we have some questions, and maybe we can from the audience. So I'm just going to take a quick peek here. Sorry, lots of comments, but
that's good.
Okay, let's see. Lots of welcome from Connecticut. And someone said, I wish I could do clinical trials. Okay.
Well, and I think while you're looking, I think the person that said, I wish I could do clinical trials, I mean, I think that speaks to, we talked a little bit about the hoops, right, that you need to jump through, and the insurance hoop is one, but, having appropriate labs, a good, good blood count, good kidney function, liver function, those are all things that those boxes need to be checked. And so it can be frustrating on the other side. And I know it's frustrating for us as physicians because we want to get our patients on. And so sometimes we are limited because we want to keep people safe. And so there are certain things that we can't have someone on.
Okay, a lot of personal examples, and I don't really want to share them necessarily. So how about what options are there for patients with clear cell?
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting. That's an area of great interest for me. In our group, we all kind of have focused on certain rare tumors because we want our patients to have consistent care. And so I'm one of the few people in our MD Anderson group that see our patients with clear cell. And what we're doing right now is we're currently developing some strategies around immunotherapy for clear cell. And we're not the only ones. This is ongoing across the country where there's several different trials. And the reason for that is, immunotherapy has been just okay for ovarian cancer overall. And I think there's still opportunity here. We're working out different combinations that might work better for kind of the garden variety ovarian cancer. However, clear cell has had benefit from immunotherapy. And when we teased out some of the early trials of single agent immunotherapy, and when we looked at who was responding, it was patients with clear cell. And so there's something about that tumor that seems to be easier for the immune cells to find. And so we're really excited about moving forward some combination strategies with immune therapy in clear cell. And so we actually have a trial just for clear cell that's opening, I think, in the next week or two. So if you're interested, you just reach out to me because I think it's gonna go like hotcakes. And I really do think we're gonna see some great benefit. I do think there's another target that's really interesting for patients with clear cell. It's something called ARID1A. It's a mutation that we see quite commonly in clear cell. And so there's a number of different targeted therapy strategies that are moving forward to try to target that particular abnormality as well. So I think there's a lot going on for patients with clear cell. So fingers crossed, we're going to see some good impact.
And hopefully the same is true for some of the other subtypes. So for example, low grade.
Or
right.
For low grade, it's same. I mean, we have really done a good job, I think, over these last few years to realize that low grade is its own entity. And so there are a number of different trials looking at anti-hormones in combination for low grade, and then MEK inhibitors. I think that, those of you out there with low grade are going to say, oh, yeah, I know the MEK inhibitor story. We have a number of trials now that have shown those are beneficial. And then, there are many of us that are moving forward trials that are kind of going across different targeted therapies for low grade. So actually, we have a trial with a PARP inhibitor and a MEK inhibitor that has been really intriguing for patients with low grade. So really trying to use those known targets against these tumors. So I think we're getting better about that. We still have a long way to go.
Okay, yeah, somebody just asked about low grade. That was perfect.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
How long do clinical trials usually last?
Oh, great question. It's going to depend on the trial. Many of the upfront trials are going to have a very specific time point. So you're going to get 6 cycles of chemo, and then you'll get a year or 2 of maintenance. And that's when the treatment stops, but then you may still be monitored because they'll be wanting to, keep an eye on you, make sure there's no recurrence of disease, and also monitor how long you can go without any problems. And so you may be technically off treatment, but you're still on trial. As you get later in kind of your disease course, if you're on a clinical trial, say in the recurrent setting, you stay on the trial for as long as it's working. So of course, they make sure that you're tolerating your treatment well and you feel well. We're not going to keep you on a treatment that makes you feel miserable. But if you're tolerating it and your side effects are controlled and the treatment is benefiting you, you can stay on for an indeterminate amount of time. And, for example, I just published a study that we started back in 2014. I still have patients on that study. I have a woman that's been on it for over 5 years, and the industry partner that's helped sponsor it continues to provide the drugs for that patient because she is continuing to get benefits. So a lot of those later studies, there's no time period where it's like, okay, sorry, you're off the trial. Like if you're getting benefit, you stay on it.
I just want to encourage, if there's more questions out there, to send them in. I think we may have. Oh, here's another question. What phase is best to participate in? Is there a better time? Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3? You talked about the different phases.
Yeah, I think really all 3 phases are appropriate. I think the main thing to make sure is when you're being offered a trial and you're considering a trial, why is that trial being offered to me? Is that because this is this is what you have, and this is, it's like square peg, round hole, like we're just going to make this work? Or is this something you're seeing benefit for patients with ovarian cancer? So, I do a lot of early phase trials, although I also lead phase 3 trials. So I'm a good judge of all of them. But, with the phase 1 trials, sometimes, if you've got an abnormality in your tumor, if you've got a target, and I don't have a standard of care for that, but I have a phase 1 trial that directly targets your abnormality, I'm going to be pretty enthusiastic about you going on that. And again, because we're going to watch it closely. And if it's not working, we're going to move on, and I think when we have higher hopes to see benefit from that agent over kind of a standard of care chemotherapy, say 3rd or 4th line, where the responses are maybe 5 to 10%. And that's not good enough. Like, we're not happy with that. And so what we're seeing across a lot of early phase trials, and some of you may be familiar with there's a drug called larotrectinib. That drug got its FDA approval from its phase 1 trial because it was something like an 80% response rate for patients that had this abnormality, this NTRK fusion. If they had that in their tumor, they essentially got benefit from this drug. I mean, it was just awesome. So for me, if there's a specific target, if there's a reason why you're being offered that phase 1, then that's the right trial for you to be on. Now, phase 2, you're going to have a little bit more details. They're going to likely have already looked at this drug in your tumor type in a few patients in phase 1, and they have a sense that, oh yeah, this is going to work. We're really excited about that. So you have a little bit more information about side effects. Probably you have a little bit more information about the chance of benefit. So you might feel a little bit more comfort, like, okay, I kind of know that this is most like, I know what to kind of expect here. And then phase 3, again, like I mentioned, those are going to be the practice changing studies, but those are often going to be randomized. So you may not get the experimental agent, right? So obviously it's not a reason not to participate, but, you know, sometimes with those earlier phase trials, you're like, I know I got the drug, you know? So for the phase 3s, it's what's going to change practice. And you have a chance of getting kind of that experimental, but you might not, you know? So again, not a reason not to participate, but just understanding kind of what each trial might offer.
I think we are out of questions and we are also out of time.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So I want to thank you. I just want to encourage people, because I realized we never said about the need for tumor testing. And so you need to get your tumor tested to be able to have these markers, to be able to identify for possible trials. So
really good point
there that people need to, you know, have their tumors tested. And that's a question that you would have with your surgeon at the time of surgery, basically. I want to thank you again, Dr. Westin, for the amazing information. I could sit here for hours and chat with you because I think it's just super exciting. But I do want to remind everybody that we will do this again next month, and we're going to talk about ovarian cancer 101 because it will be Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month.
Great.
So, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for watching.
Thanks so much. Have a great one.